Lieutenant Sarah Chen had always been different from the other officers aboard the USS Valiant. While her male counterparts gathered in the mess hall trading war stories and boasting about their combat experiences, she preferred the quiet solitude of the ship's observation deck, watching the endless expanse of ocean stretch toward the horizon. At 28, she had already earned more commendations than officers twice her age, but she wore her achievements like invisible armor, never speaking of them unless directly asked. The Pacific Fleet had been her home for the past 6 years, ever since she graduated summa cum laude from the Naval Academy with a degree in tactical operations. Her father, a Vietnam veteran who had lost his leg to a landmine in the Mekong Delta, had initially opposed her decision to join the military. He understood the weight that came with taking lives in service of country, and he feared what that burden might do to his daughter's gentle spirit. But Sarah had inherited more than his stubborn determination. She possessed an almost supernatural ability to read tactical situations and make split-second decisions that saved lives. Her first deployment had been to the Arabian Gulf during the height of regional tensions. Fresh out of the academy, she had been assigned to the destroyer USS Phoenix as a junior tactical officer. The senior staff had watched her with a mixture of curiosity and skepticism. Female officers were still relatively uncommon in combat roles, and many of the seasoned sailors wondered if she would crack under pressure. They would soon learn that Sarah Chen was forged from different steel altogether. The Phoenix had been part of a convoy escort mission when intelligence reports indicated hostile forces were planning an attack on a merchant vessel carrying humanitarian supplies to refugees. Sarah had been monitoring communications when she detected an unusual pattern in the radio chatter. While the senior officers dismissed her concerns as rookie nervousness, she persisted in her analysis. Her linguistic studies at the academy had included Arabic and Farsi, allowing her to pick up nuances that others missed. At 0300 hours, her instincts proved correct. 3 fast-attack craft emerged from a coastal inlet, moving at high speed toward the convoy. The merchant ship was a sitting duck, loaded with medical supplies and food for displaced families. Sarah's fingers flew across her console as she calculated intercept courses and weapon solutions. The engagement lasted exactly 4 minutes and 37 seconds. When the smoke cleared, all 3 hostile vessels had been neutralized with surgical precision, and not a single civilian life had been lost. The after-action report credited her quick thinking and accurate fire control with preventing what could have been a humanitarian disaster. Her commanding officer, Captain Morrison, had pulled her aside after the mission debriefing. He was a gruff man in his 50s who had served in 3 different conflicts, and he looked at her with something approaching awe. Sarah had expected praise, but instead, he offered her something more valuable: understanding. Morrison had seen enough combat to recognize the look in her eyes after the engagement. It was the same expression he had worn after his first kill, a mixture of professional satisfaction and profound sadness. He explained that feeling conflicted about taking lives, even enemy lives, was not a sign of weakness but of humanity. The day a soldier stopped feeling that weight, he said, was the day they lost their soul. Sarah carried those words with her through subsequent deployments, using them as an anchor when the darkness threatened to overwhelm her. Her reputation grew with each mission. During anti-piracy operations off the Horn of Africa, she coordinated a rescue that freed 37 hostages from a hijacked cargo vessel. The precision strike she orchestrated took out the pirates' weapons cache without harming a single captive. In the South China Sea, her tactical analysis prevented an international incident by identifying a fishing vessel in distress that other ships had mistaken for a hostile probe. But it was during her deployment to the Eastern Mediterranean that Sarah truly distinguished herself. Intelligence had identified a terrorist cell planning to attack a cruise ship carrying 1,200 civilians from various nations. The operation required coordination between multiple naval forces and demanded split-second timing. Sarah served as the primary tactical coordinator, managing fire control for 6 different vessels while maintaining communication with special operations teams. The terrorists had converted a cargo ship into a floating bomb, intending to ram it into the cruise liner in international waters. Sarah's team had less than 20 minutes to neutralize the threat without triggering the explosives that could still damage the passenger vessel. Using a combination of electronic warfare and precision strikes, they disabled the cargo ship's engines and communications while Special Forces teams fast-roped onto the deck. The engagement was textbook perfect. But Sarah knew the human cost. 17 terrorists died in the operation. Men who had chosen violence but who had also been someone's sons, brothers, fathers. She spent the night after the mission walking the ship's deck, trying to reconcile the mathematics of warfare with its moral complexity. 1,200 innocent lives saved, 17 hostile lives lost. The equation seemed simple, but the weight of it pressed down on her chest like a physical presence. Her fellow officers celebrated the mission's success, but they also noticed Sarah's tendency to withdraw after combat operations. Some mistook her quiet reflection for weakness or PTSD. They failed to understand that her introspection was actually a source of strength, allowing her to maintain her humanity while excelling in an inherently inhumane profession. Commander Rodriguez, the ship's executive officer, had served with several female officers and recognized something special in Sarah's approach to combat. Where others might become hardened or callous, she somehow managed to retain her empathy while developing an almost preternatural ability to make the right tactical decisions under pressure. Her kill count was climbing, but so was her reputation for minimizing collateral damage and protecting civilian lives. The fleet's informal networks buzzed with stories about the young lieutenant who could thread a missile between two buildings or disable an enemy vessel without sinking it. Other officers began requesting transfers to serve under her command, recognizing that her tactical skills significantly increased their chances of survival. Sarah accepted these accolades with characteristic humility, deflecting praise while quietly studying after-action reports to identify areas for improvement. By her 5th year of service, Lieutenant Sarah Chen had become something of a legend within the Pacific Fleet. Her official record remained classified, but rumors circulated about her involvement in operations from the Persian Gulf to the Taiwan Strait. Some estimates put her confirmed kills in the high double digits, an extraordinary number for a naval officer. Yet those who served closely with her knew that each number represented not a notch on her belt, but a weight on her conscience. The USS Valiant represented the pinnacle of her career thus far. As the ship's senior tactical officer, she oversaw a team of 12 specialists responsible for the vessel's offensive and defensive capabilities. The Valiant was one of the Navy's most advanced destroyers, equipped with cutting-edge weapon systems that could engage targets hundreds of miles away with devastating accuracy. In Sarah's hands, it had become one of the most effective combat platforms in the fleet. Her quarters aboard the Valiant reflected her personality. Sparse but carefully organized, with a small bookshelf containing works on military history, tactical theory, and surprisingly, poetry. A photograph of her parents sat on her desk next to her academy graduation picture. Her father's words from that day still echoed in her mind. Remember who you are. Beneath the uniform, that person is more important than any rank or medal. The crew of the Valiant respected Sarah's competence, but many found her difficult to read. She maintained professional relationships with her colleagues while keeping her personal thoughts carefully guarded. During off-duty hours, she might be found in the ship's small gym, working through complex martial arts forms that helped her process stress, or in the communications center, writing letters to the families of sailors who had served under her command. What her shipmates didn't know was that Sarah maintained a private journal where she recorded not just tactical observations, but her personal reflections on each operation. She wrote about the faces of the people she had saved and the ones she had been forced to kill. She documented her evolving understanding of warfare's moral complexities and her determination to never let the necessities of combat erode her fundamental humanity. The journal also contained her thoughts about being a female officer in a male-dominated environment. She had faced skepticism, condescension, and occasionally outright hostility from colleagues who questioned whether women belonged in combat roles. Rather than respond with anger or defensiveness, Sarah had chosen to let her performance speak for itself. Her tactical skills and leadership abilities had gradually earned the respect of even the most prejudiced officers. However, she had also learned to navigate the complex social dynamics of military life. Some officers treated her as an equal professional, others as a curiosity to be studied, and a few as a target for crude humor or inappropriate comments. Sarah had developed a thick skin and a sharp wit, but she also maintained clear boundaries about what she would and would not tolerate. The upcoming fleet exercise would test all of her skills, both tactical and diplomatic. Representatives from multiple ships would gather aboard the USS Valiant for a week of war games and strategic planning. Sarah knew that her performance during these exercises could determine her next assignment and potentially her path to higher command. She had spent weeks preparing, analyzing potential scenarios and coordinating with her team to ensure they were ready for any challenge. What she couldn't prepare for was the conversation that would unfold in the officers' mess, where a casual joke would force her to confront not just the assumptions of her colleagues, but the full weight of her own military record. The exercise would indeed test her skills, but not in the way any of them expected. The officers' mess aboard the USS Valiant buzzed with the controlled energy that always preceded major fleet exercises. Representatives from 7 different ships had gathered for the strategic planning sessions, turning the normally quiet dining area into a hub of animated discussion. Charts and tactical displays covered every available surface, and the air was thick with cigarette smoke and the aroma of strong military coffee. Lieutenant Commander Jake Harrison had arrived from the USS Intrepid with his usual swagger and a reputation for tactical innovation that rivaled Sarah's own. At 34, he was considered one of the fleet's rising stars, having distinguished himself in operations throughout the Pacific Theater. His sandy hair and easy smile made him popular with junior officers, while his aggressive tactical style had earned him commendations from senior command. However, those who served closely with him knew that his confidence sometimes crossed the line into arrogance. Harrison had heard the rumors about Lieutenant Chen long before meeting her. Stories circulated throughout the fleet about the quiet officer who could thread missiles through impossible gaps and coordinate multi-ship operations with surgical precision. Some accounts bordered on the mythical, describing her as capable of reading enemy intentions before they formed, and striking with an almost supernatural accuracy. Harrison was skeptical of such tales, having learned that military legends often grew in the telling. When he first encountered Sarah during the pre-exercise briefings, he was struck by her understated presence. She spoke only when necessary, but her contributions were invariably insightful and precise. Her tactical recommendations displayed a deep understanding of not just weapons systems and enemy capabilities, but of the human factors that often determine the outcome of engagements. Harrison found himself simultaneously impressed and somewhat threatened by her competence. The other officers present represented a cross-section of the fleet's leadership. Commander Patricia Walsh from the USS Defender brought 2 decades of experience and a no-nonsense approach to naval warfare. Lieutenant Commander David Park from the USS Guardian was known for his innovative use of electronic warfare systems. Captain Frank Martinez from the USS Sovereign served as the senior officer present, his weathered face bearing the marks of a career spent in harm's way. As the evening progressed, the formal briefings gave way to more relaxed discussions. Officers shared stories from recent deployments, comparing notes on equipment performance and tactical innovations. The conversation naturally gravitated toward combat experiences, with each participant contributing accounts of successful operations and lessons learned under fire. Sarah listened attentively, but contributed little, preferring to observe the dynamics of the group. Harrison noticed her reticence and mistook it for inexperience or uncertainty. He had encountered other officers who talked a good game in briefings but lacked actual combat experience to back up their theoretical knowledge. In his mind, Sarah's quiet demeanor suggested she might be one of those officers who excelled in simulations, but hadn't been tested in real combat situations. The discussion turned to the upcoming exercises, which would simulate a complex multi-threat environment involving surface vessels, submarines, aircraft, and electronic warfare elements. Each officer would be responsible for coordinating their ship's response while maintaining communication with the overall fleet command structure. The scenarios were designed to test not just individual ship capabilities, but the fleet's ability to function as an integrated fighting force. Sarah had spent considerable time studying the exercise parameters and had developed several innovative tactical approaches that could potentially give the fleet significant advantages. However, she held back from sharing these ideas immediately, preferring to gauge the group's receptivity and understand the political dynamics at play. Military hierarchies could be delicate things, and she had learned that timing and presentation were often as important as the quality of one's ideas. Lieutenant Commander Harrison, emboldened by several drinks and encouraged by the informal atmosphere, began regaling the group with stories from his recent deployment to the Arabian Sea. His accounts were vivid and detailed, describing close-quarters engagements with hostile forces and the split-second decisions that determined life-or-death outcomes. The other officers listened with professional interest, occasionally asking technical questions or sharing similar experiences. As Harrison's stories became more elaborate, he began to exaggerate certain details for dramatic effect. His 3 confirmed kills became 5, then 7, and the range of his successful engagements grew with each telling. The other officers, veterans themselves, recognized the embellishments but allowed them to pass unchallenged. Military culture had room for a certain amount of storytelling, and Harrison's core experiences were undoubtedly genuine, even if the details had been enhanced. Commander Walsh eventually steered the conversation toward more substantive matters, discussing the strategic implications of recent geopolitical developments and how they might affect naval operations in the region. Her analysis was thoughtful and comprehensive, drawing on her extensive experience in various theaters of operation. Sarah found herself nodding in agreement with many of Walsh's observations, recognizing a kindred spirit who understood the complexities of modern naval warfare. The evening took an unexpected turn when one of the junior officers from Harrison's ship arrived with updated intelligence reports. The young ensign, clearly overwhelmed by being in the presence of so many senior officers, delivered his briefing with nervous precision. The reports contained details about potential threats in the exercise area, including the possible presence of foreign intelligence-gathering vessels that might attempt to observe the fleet's operations. This development added a new dimension to the upcoming exercises, transforming them from purely academic scenarios into situations with real-world implications. The officers immediately began discussing how to modify their tactical approaches to account for the possibility of actual surveillance. Sarah found herself drawn into the conversation, her analytical mind already working through the implications of operating under hostile observation. Her first significant contribution to the evening's discussion came when she identified a potential vulnerability in the fleet's planned formation. The standard approach to multi-threat scenarios called for ships to maintain specific spacing and positioning to maximize mutual support. However, Sarah pointed out that this formation would also create predictable patterns that sophisticated adversaries could exploit. Her alternative suggested a more dynamic positioning system that would maintain tactical advantages while presenting fewer opportunities for enemy analysis. The other officers listened with growing respect as Sarah outlined her reasoning. Her analysis was comprehensive and detailed, demonstrating not just tactical knowledge, but a deep understanding of enemy capabilities and intentions. Harrison found himself reassessing his initial impressions, recognizing that Sarah's quiet demeanor concealed formidable professional competence. As the conversation continued, Sarah gradually became more participatory, sharing insights and suggestions that enhanced the group's overall understanding of the challenges they would face. Her contributions were consistently valuable, demonstrating a breadth of experience and depth of knowledge that impressed even the most senior officers present. However, she remained careful to present her ideas as suggestions rather than directives, respecting the command structure and the egos of her colleagues. The atmosphere in the officers' mess became increasingly collegial as the evening progressed. Professional barriers began to lower, and the conversation took on a more personal tone. Officers shared stories not just of their tactical successes but of their challenges and failures, creating a sense of mutual understanding and shared experience. Sarah found herself relaxing slightly, though she remained alert to the social dynamics at play. It was during this more relaxed phase of the evening that Harrison made a comment that would change the entire dynamic of the gathering. Emboldened by alcohol and what he perceived as growing acceptance from his peers, he decided to test the boundaries of the group's tolerance for his particular brand of humor. His target, unfortunately, was Sarah, whose quiet competence he still found somewhat threatening to his own self-image. The comment began innocuously enough, building on the evening's earlier discussions about combat experience and tactical effectiveness. Harrison had noticed that Sarah, despite her obvious knowledge and analytical skills, had not shared any specific combat stories of her own. In his mind, this confirmed his suspicion that her reputation might be built more on simulation results and theoretical knowledge than actual battlefield experience. What Harrison failed to understand was that Sarah's reluctance to share combat stories stemmed not from a lack of experience, but from a profound respect for the weight of the actions she had taken in service of her country. Each engagement she had participated in was burned into her memory with crystalline clarity, but she viewed them as sacred obligations rather than entertainment for casual conversation. Her kills were not trophies to be displayed, but responsibilities that she carried with solemn dignity. The setup for Harrison's joke was carefully constructed, playing on stereotypes and assumptions that he believed would resonate with the other officers. He positioned it as friendly ribbing between colleagues, the kind of good-natured harassment that was common in military culture. However, his underlying motivations were less benign, driven by a need to diminish Sarah's growing influence within the group and reassert his own position as the dominant tactical expert. The specific content of Harrison's joke would target what he perceived as Sarah's greatest weakness, her gender, and his assumption about her limited combat experience. He had crafted what he thought was a clever play on words that would simultaneously acknowledge her professional competence while subtly undermining it through implications about the nature and extent of her combat record. The joke relied on the assumption that the other officers shared his skepticism about female combat effectiveness and would appreciate his wit in exposing what he saw as pretension. What Harrison had not anticipated was the depth and scope of Sarah's actual combat experience, information that was largely classified and known only to a select few within the command structure. Her official records contained only abbreviated summaries of her actions, with the full details restricted due to the sensitive nature of many operations. The rumors that circulated throughout the fleet, while generally accurate in their assessment of her competence, significantly underestimated the true extent of her combat record. As Harrison prepared to deliver his carefully constructed joke, the other officers sensed a shift in the room's atmosphere. Commander Walsh, with her extensive experience in military politics, recognized the signs of an impending social disaster. Captain Martinez, the senior officer present, began to look uncomfortable, his instincts warning him that the evening was about to take an unfortunate turn. Even Lieutenant Commander Park, typically focused on technical matters rather than interpersonal dynamics, seemed to sense that something was wrong. Sarah herself remained outwardly calm, but those who knew her well might have noticed the slight tightening around her eyes that indicated her emotional defenses were engaging. She had faced similar situations before, moments when colleagues attempted to diminish her through jokes or comments that revealed their underlying assumptions about her capabilities. Her response had always been measured and professional, designed to maintain unit cohesion while establishing clear boundaries. The stage was set for a confrontation that would force everyone present to confront their assumptions about combat, gender, and the true cost of military service. Harrison's joke, intended to establish his dominance and diminish Sarah's influence, would instead reveal the profound gap between perception and reality, between the stories soldiers tell and the truths they carry. The laughter he expected would give way to stunned silence as Sarah's response stripped away pretension and exposed the raw reality of what it meant to take lives in service of one's country. The moment arrived with the casual cruelty that often characterizes social disasters. Harrison leaned back in his chair, a confident smile playing across his lips as he prepared to deliver what he believed would be the evening's comedic highlight. The other officers, sensing something significant about to unfold, unconsciously leaned forward in their chairs. The ambient noise of the ship seemed to fade away, leaving only the hum of ventilation systems and the distant sound of waves against the hull. Harrison's voice carried clearly across the officers' mess as he began his setup. His tone was deliberately casual, designed to make his words seem like spontaneous observation rather than calculated provocation. He gestured toward Sarah with his coffee cup, his body language suggesting the easy familiarity of colleagues sharing a private joke. The other officers watched with growing unease, recognizing the signs of a social boundary about to be crossed. The joke itself was a masterpiece of casual cruelty, expertly crafted to simultaneously acknowledge Sarah's professional reputation while undermining it through gendered assumptions and implications about the nature of her combat record. Harrison played on the double meaning of certain military terms, suggesting that Sarah's kills might be of a different nature than those achieved by her male counterparts. His delivery was smooth and practiced, indicating that this was not the first time he had employed such humor at the expense of female colleagues. The immediate reaction in the room was a mixture of uncomfortable laughter from some junior officers and stony silence from the more senior personnel. Commander Walsh's expression hardened visibly, her decades of experience in male-dominated military environments giving her immediate insight into the true nature of Harrison's comment. Captain Martinez set down his coffee cup with deliberate care, his weathered face showing the first signs of genuine anger. Sarah's initial response was so controlled that it almost seemed like she hadn't heard the joke at all. She continued to examine the tactical charts spread across the table, her finger tracing potential approach routes with the same precision she had shown throughout the evening. However, those watching carefully noticed the subtle changes in her posture, the slight straightening of her spine, the almost imperceptible tightening of her jaw, the way her free hand clenched briefly before relaxing. For nearly 30 seconds, the room remained suspended in uncomfortable silence. Harrison's confident expression began to waver as he realized that his joke had not produced the reaction he had anticipated. Instead of the mixture of laughter and mild disapproval that would have validated his social dominance while allowing him to dismiss any criticism as oversensitivity, he faced a wall of professional disapproval from his peers. When Sarah finally looked up from her charts, her expression was carefully neutral, but something in her eyes made several officers instinctively straighten in their chairs. She studied Harrison with the same analytical intensity she brought to tactical problems, as if she were calculating firing solutions or assessing threat potential. The silence stretched longer, becoming increasingly oppressive as everyone waited for her response. Her voice, when she finally spoke, was quiet but carried clearly across the room. There was no anger in her tone, no hint of the hurt that Harrison's comment had been designed to inflict. Instead, there was something far more unsettling. A calm, professional detachment that suggested she was about to share classified information that would fundamentally alter everyone's understanding of the situation. Sarah began by acknowledging Harrison's comment with the same courtesy she would show to any professional inquiry. She thanked him for his interest in her combat record and indicated that she understood the curiosity that her reticence to share war stories might have generated. Her tone remained conversational, almost friendly, as she began to provide the clarification that Harrison had so carelessly requested. The first shock came when Sarah mentioned her actual number of confirmed kills. The figure was significantly higher than any of the officers present had achieved, including Harrison himself. But she delivered this information without boastfulness or dramatic emphasis, stating it as simply as she might report ammunition inventory or fuel consumption. The casual nature of her delivery made the number even more impactful, suggesting that such statistics were merely routine aspects of her professional performance. However, the true weight of Sarah's response began to emerge as she provided context for these numbers. She described the circumstances of her first kill with clinical precision: the date, the location, the tactical situation that had necessitated lethal force. Her account was devoid of heroic narrative or self-aggrandizement, focusing instead on the technical aspects of the engagement and the strategic objectives that had been achieved. As Sarah continued, it became clear that her combat experience was not only more extensive than anyone had realized, but qualitatively different from the typical engagements that most naval officers encountered. Her kills included not just enemy combatants engaged in direct hostilities, but individuals involved in terrorist operations, human trafficking, and other activities that placed civilian populations at risk. Each engagement had been carefully planned and precisely executed, with minimal collateral damage and maximum strategic impact. The room's atmosphere grew increasingly tense as Sarah methodically detailed engagement after engagement. Her voice never wavered, her tone never changed, but the cumulative effect of her account was devastating. She described coordinating strikes that had prevented terrorist attacks on civilian targets, neutralizing threats to merchant shipping, and eliminating individuals whose continued existence posed direct threats to national security interests. What made Sarah's account even more powerful was her attention to the human cost of her actions. She did not simply recite numbers and tactical details, but acknowledged the weight of each life she had taken. She spoke of the families left behind, the complex moral calculations involved in targeting decisions, and the careful procedures followed to minimize civilian casualties. Her professionalism was evident in every word, but so was the profound sense of responsibility that she carried for her actions. The other officers listened with growing amazement and discomfort as Sarah's true record was revealed. Harrison's earlier boasts about his own combat experience began to seem trivial in comparison, his exaggerations exposed as the posturing of someone desperate to inflate his own importance. The casual nature of his joke took on an increasingly ugly character as the real nature of Sarah's service became apparent. Commander Walsh found herself reassessing everything she thought she knew about the quiet lieutenant. The tactical innovations and analytical insights that Sarah had demonstrated throughout the evening suddenly took on new significance when viewed in the context of extensive real-world combat experience. Her suggestions were not theoretical exercises but practical applications of lessons learned through direct engagement with hostile forces. Captain Martinez, as the senior officer present, began to understand the implications of what he was hearing. Sarah's classified record indicated involvement in operations at the highest levels of national security, suggesting that her security clearance and operational authority were significantly greater than her current rank might indicate. The casual discussion of her combat statistics revealed a level of trust and responsibility that was reserved for only the most competent and reliable personnel. As Sarah's account continued, she began to address the specific nature of Harrison's joke. Without directly acknowledging the gendered assumptions underlying his comment, she provided detailed descriptions of close-quarters combat situations where she had personally eliminated threats. Her descriptions were technical and professional, but they left no doubt about the physical and psychological demands of the situations she had faced. The tactical complexity of Sarah's engagements became increasingly apparent as she described multi-phase operations, requiring coordination between naval forces, special operations teams, and intelligence assets. Her role in these operations was clearly central rather than peripheral, involving split-second decisions that affected not just military outcomes but civilian lives and international relations. The level of trust and authority implied by such responsibilities was extraordinary for an officer of her rank. Sarah's response also revealed the personal cost of her extensive combat experience. Without explicitly stating it, her account made clear that she carried emotional and psychological burdens that few of her colleagues could fully understand. The careful professional language she used could not entirely mask the weight of responsibility she felt for every life lost, both enemy and friendly, in operations under her command or coordination. The room had become completely silent, except for Sarah's quiet voice, as she methodically destroyed every assumption that had underlain Harrison's joke. Her combat record was not only more extensive than his own, but achieved at a younger age and under circumstances of greater complexity and strategic importance. The gendered implications of his humor were revealed as not just inappropriate but ignorant, based on fundamental misunderstanding of modern military realities. As Sarah approached the conclusion of her response, the other officers began to understand that they were witnessing something unprecedented. This was not simply a rebuttal to an inappropriate joke, but a masterclass in professional dignity and tactical competence. Sarah had transformed Harrison's attempted humiliation into an opportunity to educate her colleagues about the true nature of modern naval warfare and the individuals who prosecuted at the highest levels. The final element of Sarah's response addressed the broader implications of Harrison's comment for military culture and professional relationships. Without directly criticizing him or his assumptions, she made clear that such humor was not only inappropriate, but counterproductive to unit cohesion and mission effectiveness. Her tone remained professional and respectful, but the underlying message was unmistakable. Such behavior would not be tolerated in any unit under her command. When Sarah finally finished speaking and returned her attention to the tactical charts, the silence in the officers' mess was profound and absolute. Every person present understood that they had witnessed something extraordinary. The complete professional destruction of a colleague's credibility, achieved through nothing more than the calm recitation of facts. Harrison's joke had backfired so completely that his standing within the group was permanently diminished, while Sarah's reputation had been elevated to an almost mythical level. The silence that followed Sarah's response stretched across the officers' mess like a physical presence, heavy and oppressive in its completeness. Even the ambient sounds of the ship seemed muted, as if the USS Valiant itself had paused to absorb the implications of what had just been revealed. The tactical charts and operational documents that had dominated the evening's discussions now seemed trivial compared to the human drama that had just unfolded. Harrison sat frozen in his chair, his confident smile having long since disappeared. The coffee cup in his hand trembled slightly, betraying the shock that his carefully controlled expression attempted to hide. His earlier boasts about combat experience and tactical prowess now seemed not just exaggerated, but pathetically inadequate when measured against Sarah's quietly delivered account. The joke that was supposed to establish his dominance had instead exposed him as a posturing amateur in the presence of a true professional. Commander Walsh was the first to break the silence, her voice carefully neutral as she addressed the group's need to return to operational planning. Her decades of military experience had taught her to recognize moments when personal conflicts threatened to undermine mission effectiveness, and she moved smoothly to redirect the conversation toward professional matters. However, her eyes lingered on Sarah with newfound respect and understanding, recognizing in her a kindred spirit who had learned to navigate the complex challenges of military leadership. Captain Martinez cleared his throat deliberately, the sound serving as both a signal for the group to refocus and a subtle reprimand to Harrison for his inappropriate behavior. As the senior officer present, Martinez understood the delicate balance required to maintain unit cohesion while addressing conduct that threatened morale and effectiveness. His weathered face showed no emotion, but his positioning and body language made clear his disapproval of what had transpired. Sarah herself seemed unaffected by the tension that filled the room. She had returned her attention to the operational documents with the same focused intensity she had shown throughout the evening, as if the previous exchange had been merely a brief interruption in more important work. Her professionalism was absolute, but those watching carefully noticed the subtle signs that indicated she remained alert to the group's dynamics and prepared to address any further challenges to her authority or competence. The junior officers present struggled to process what they had witnessed. Their understanding of military hierarchy and combat experience had been fundamentally challenged by Sarah's revelation. The quiet lieutenant they had observed throughout the evening was revealed to be one of the most experienced combat veterans in the fleet, with a record of achievement that surpassed officers of much higher rank and greater seniority. The implications for their own careers and understanding of military service were profound and unsettling. Lieutenant Commander Park, recognizing the need to restore some semblance of normal interaction, ventured a technical question about electronic warfare applications in the upcoming exercises. His question was directed toward the group as a whole, but his respectful tone and careful phrasing acknowledged Sarah's newly revealed expertise while providing an opportunity for professional dialogue to resume. The gesture was appreciated by the other officers, who recognized his diplomatic skill in navigating the social minefield that the evening had become. Sarah's response to Park's question demonstrated the same analytical precision and tactical insight that had characterized her earlier contributions, but now her words carried additional weight given the context of her revealed experience. Her suggestions for electronic warfare applications drew on practical knowledge gained through actual combat operations, providing insights that were immediately recognizable as coming from someone who had applied these techniques under life-and-death conditions. As the conversation gradually resumed, the dynamics of the group had been permanently altered. Sarah's position within the informal hierarchy had been elevated from respected colleague to acknowledged expert, while Harrison's influence had been correspondingly diminished. The other officers found themselves deferring to her judgment on tactical matters with a level of respect that had been absent earlier in the evening. The revelation of Sarah's combat record also cast new light on her earlier behavior and comments. Her reluctance to share war stories was now understood as the appropriate discretion of someone dealing with classified operations, rather than lack of experience. Her analytical approach to tactical problems was revealed as the methodology of someone who had tested theories against reality and understood the human cost of military decisions. Harrison made several attempts to restore his credibility through contributions to the renewed discussion, but his comments rang hollow in the aftermath of his spectacular misjudgment. His earlier confidence had been replaced by a desperate need to prove his worth, leading to increasingly strained attempts to demonstrate his expertise. The other officers, recognizing his discomfort but unwilling to assist someone who had so thoroughly violated professional norms, allowed his comments to pass without the supportive responses he desperately sought. The evening's remaining discussions took on a markedly different character as the officers grappled with the implications of what they had learned. Sarah's tactical recommendations were now received as authoritative guidance from someone whose combat experience exceeded their own collective knowledge. Her insights into enemy capabilities and potential responses carried the weight of practical experience rather than theoretical speculation. Commander Walsh found herself viewing the upcoming exercises through a new lens, recognizing that Sarah's participation would likely result in tactical innovations that could revolutionize fleet operations. Her understanding of enemy capabilities and decision-making processes, gained through extensive direct engagement, provided advantages that simulation exercises and intelligence briefings could never fully replicate. As the evening wound down, the officers began preparing to return to their respective ships. The formal exchanges of courtesy and professional pleasantries carried undertones of the evening's revelations, with several officers making subtle efforts to establish better relationships with Sarah. Her newfound status as an acknowledged expert made her friendship and professional support valuable commodities within the fleet's informal networks. Harrison's departure was particularly awkward, his earlier swagger replaced by the careful movements of someone attempting to avoid further embarrassment. His perfunctory farewells were met with equally formal responses from colleagues who no longer viewed him with the respect he had previously commanded. The social capital he had expended in his failed attempt to diminish Sarah would take years to rebuild, if it could be restored at all. Sarah remained behind to discuss final preparations for the upcoming exercises with Captain Martinez and Commander Walsh. The conversation that followed was conducted in the respectful tones reserved for discussions between true professionals who recognized each other's competence and experience. Martinez, in particular, seemed interested in understanding how Sarah's tactical approaches might be integrated into the fleet's standard operating procedures. The captain's questions revealed his growing appreciation for the strategic advantages that Sarah's experience could provide. Her ability to anticipate enemy responses and coordinate complex multi-platform operations offered possibilities for tactical innovation that could significantly enhance the fleet's effectiveness. Martinez began exploring the possibility of recommending Sarah for accelerated promotion and expanded operational responsibilities. Walsh's contributions to the discussion focused on the leadership challenges that Sarah would face as her reputation spread throughout the fleet. The evening's events would inevitably be discussed and analyzed by officers throughout the Pacific Fleet, creating both opportunities and obstacles for Sarah's continued career development. Walsh's experience in navigating military politics provided valuable insights into managing the attention that Sarah's revealed record would generate. As the three officers concluded their planning session, the implications of the evening extended far beyond the immediate tactical considerations. Sarah's response to Harrison's joke had established new standards for professional behavior and competence that would influence interactions throughout the fleet. Her demonstration of grace under pressure and ability to maintain professional dignity while defending her reputation would become a model for other officers facing similar challenges. The upcoming exercises would provide the first opportunity for Sarah to demonstrate her tactical innovations to a broader audience of fleet personnel. Her performance during these operations would either validate the evening's revelations or create new questions about the accuracy of her claims. Given her track record and the careful precision of her earlier statements, the outcome seemed predetermined in her favor. The broader implications for military culture and gender integration were also significant. Sarah's example challenged stereotypes and assumptions about female combat effectiveness, while demonstrating the professional behavior expected of all military personnel, regardless of gender. Her response to inappropriate humor provided a template for maintaining dignity while educating colleagues about acceptable standards of conduct. The evening aboard the USS Valiant had begun as a routine planning session for upcoming exercises, but had evolved into a defining moment for several military careers. Harrison's attempt to diminish a colleague through inappropriate humor had backfired spectacularly, permanently damaging his reputation while elevating Sarah's status within the fleet. The joke about her kill count had indeed silenced the entire gathering, but not in the way he had intended. Hey! Sarah's measured response had demonstrated the power of professional competence and personal integrity in confronting prejudice and ignorance. Her willingness to share details of her classified record while maintaining appropriate operational security had educated her colleagues about the realities of modern naval warfare and the individuals who prosecute it at the highest levels. The silence that had followed her response would echo through fleet corridors for years to come, serving as both warning and inspiration for future generations of naval officers. The evening's events would be analyzed in leadership courses and discussed in wardrooms throughout the Navy, becoming part of the institutional memory that shaped military culture and professional behavior. As Sarah finally retired to her quarters, she carried with her the satisfaction of having met a professional challenge with dignity and effectiveness. Her response to Harrison's joke had not only defended her own reputation, but it also advanced the cause of all military personnel who faced discrimination or inappropriate treatment. The silence that had greeted her words was not just acknowledgement of her individual achievements, but recognition of the changing nature of military service and the evolution of professional standards within the armed forces.